Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's CITI program webinar. Today's topic is medical marijuana, a budding field of research, and it is presented by Dr. Jane Dumsha. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available on the CITI program's website. Now, let me tell you about today's presenter, Dr. Jane Dumsha. Dr. Dumsha is the Chief Research Operations Officer at the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, where she is responsible for all pre-award and research compliance activities. Dr. Dumsha was previously a clinical research coordinator at Thomas Jefferson University and has been a certified health education specialist since 1997.
So what are our learning objectives for today? By the end of this presentation, participants will be able to identify the federal regulations relevant to medical marijuana research, apply the federal regulations and the Belmont Report's ethical framework to research involving medical marijuana, identify unique issues presented by medical marijuana research, discuss considerations for IRB review of research involving marijuana, and identify steps for getting started in medical marijuana research. So our three main topics today are regulations and implications for research, applying the regulations to research design, and ethical and practical issues. So first, regulations and implications for research.
I'd like to provide a brief overview of some terminology. First, cannabis is technically the plant, although the term is often used interchangeably with marijuana, the product. And then hemp is actually industrial hemp, which means it has less than 0.3% THC content. And the Farm Act did not affect this if it's more than 0.3%. So THC is the psychoactive component, CBD is cannabidiol, and then there are synthetic cannabinoids. So what are the products and their legal status? Well, only Marinol and Syndrose, which are dronabinol and synthetic THC, Sesament, which is Nabilone, another synthetic THC, and Epidiolex, which is...
So what are the state approvals for medical use? So as I mentioned, it varies widely and there's a patchwork of state regulations. It could be that this patient and or caregiver register and get ID cards. Some states allow patients from other states to come there for medical marijuana. Some do not. Some or most require registration of the providers, meaning healthcare providers. The THC content and the forms such as pills, edible, and smoked varies from state to state. Some have adult use only, whereas others allow medical marijuana for minors. The dispensaries and dispensing process varies from state to state, and you may obtain it by recommendation from an approved provider, which is the most. So red light, what can we not do? As I mentioned, if it fits the NIH clinical trial definition, you cannot do it. You can only do it if you obtain the cannabis from the federal government. It's a very lengthy process, which includes DEA Schedule I research registration. Then you obtain the product from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which is grown at the University of Mississippi, and you must submit an IND or an INAD to the FDA. And it's not the composition as what's sold in dispensaries or by retailers. If you want to conduct clinical research with marijuana, other than through this process, it potentially puts your institution at risk, and your organization at risk if you're a hospital or healthcare center, because you could lose federal funding from grants, student aid, or Medicaid, Medicare, because again, it's federally illegal. So yellow light, what can you do? So you can find creative ways around obstacles. An example of this is the Canavan in Colorado. They have a van that goes to where people are going to use and obtain marijuana. The person goes, gets the marijuana, comes for baseline measurements, goes and uses the marijuana, and then the Canavan comes back and they do the post measurements. You can also go overseas, which many institutions have done, where the regulations are not so stringent. So the other yellow light is that even observational research with leaf can create a lot of confounding variables, because there are a lot of variables in leaf components. There may even be pesticides or molds in there, and you need to be concerned about secondhand smoke. Green light, what can you do? Here's the good news. So you can do observational research, secondary analysis, surveys, mapping, and you don't need DEA or FDA approval because you're not studying. So what are some practical issues for researchers? So the taxation rate and the price for recreational versus medical and research versus non-research marijuana tend to vary from state to state. Medical use could therefore be a potential incentive in itself because it's cheaper for folks to be getting it for medical purposes. Also, for research subjects, they can get it for free by voucher programs with the suppliers. You therefore need to think about careful subject screening, and we may have potentially desperate patients coming to seek medical marijuana, similar to why they seek and use other forms of alternative medicine. Also, because it's federally illegal, you cannot ship across state lines. Couriers are allowed in some states, but not others, and there's no provision for them in Pennsylvania law. So what are some practical issues for the IRB? So the challenges, obstacles, and taxation differences that I've mentioned, and other factors as well. And again, most significant, the lack of evidence on risks and benefits. Recreational and medical marijuana are not the same. The public perceptions that it's safe and natural. We need to make sure that we inform potential subjects of any known health risks if that's relevant to the population being studied. We need to think about vulnerable populations, including pregnant women and youth and young adults. The potential risks, including driving under the influence, and there are unknown effects on sedation for medical procedures of using marijuana. So what are some suggestions for getting started? So first, if you've not already done so, determine what the marijuana status is in your state or territory. Determine what the approved conditions are in your state or territory. Identify any gaps in the evidence by doing a literature review or looking at the 2017 NASEM report. Find publicly available reports to obtain data for analyses. There may be variability in the registry data collected, but it's a good place to start. And then conduct observational research, secondary analysis, surveys, and mapping, because as previously mentioned, there's no DEA or FDA required because you're not studying the actual product. You can conduct public policy research, economic research, and you can do human clinical trials and animal studies as long as they're designed so that the marijuana is not in the possession of the researcher. So the ultimate goal for researchers and research administrators is to obtain more evidence on the positive and negative effects of marijuana or cannabis. For the companies, it would be legalization of recreational.
So our first question from the audience is, what are some ways to address validity issues in self-reporting given the stigma and federal regulations?
So we're using validated instruments here for our research, such as the Addiction Severity Index, and also for secondary analysis, the NSDUH.
We encourage you to monitor the CITI program website for additional information about future webinars, available on-demand recordings of past webinars, and our new all-access webinar package.